Here's a question I want to segue to. When because it comes from Alex, I like it because it speaks to both of you. From Alexandra Nash. When a male party leader loses an election, he typically steps down from leadership and often resigns from elected politics altogether, disappears from the legislature or parliament. In contrast, both of you still hold your seats in your respective legislatures. Rachel Notley remains the leader of her party, and as I've pointed out, is going to stay as leader of the party and run to be premier again. Is this just a coincidence, or are women in politics more resilient or more willing to stay in a career that doesn't offer constant linear advancement? I'd like to hear your answers. Before you do answer, though, it is my observation that most other male leaders disappear as soon as, Stephen Harper, Dalton McGuinty, they feel it's somehow undignified to show up when they no longer have the mantle of power. And I see Kathleen Wynne in the legislature holding Doug Ford to account as an MPP, and initially enduring some heckles for that, but still holding him to account, as we did when he came on the Ryerson Democracy Forum last month. So I'm going to ask Kathleen Wynne to answer first, because you were premier and you came right back the next day as an MPP, no longer as party leader, however.
Right. So I felt very strongly that our defeat had been resounding enough that I needed to step down. I also had made a commitment to my family. I'm going to be 69 at the next election. I feel like it will be 22 years I will have been in elected office by the time the election comes around. So I felt
you'd be considered a very young candidate in U.S. presidential elections, of course.
I know, I am aware of that, and I have had people remind me of that when I said I wasn't going to run again. But nevertheless, I decided that it was a good thing for me and good for the party. We were down to a very few seats in the legislature, and it was time for me to step down and let a new leader take over. And in fact, Martin, that there was a lot of chatter the second year into our mandate after 2014 that I should step down then because I was unpopular, and I felt strongly that I was in the middle of my first majority mandate that I had won. There were things I wanted to do, and I was going to be damned if I was going to waste that. I was going to do the things that I needed to do. And quite frankly, if we were going to lose, why would I hand that over to a new leader to? Anyway, so I made that decision.
But to Alexandra's question, once you stepped down as leader, you still showed up for work every day and earned your pay. So was that hard? Was it natural?
So at the beginning, I made that decision. I felt an obligation to my constituents. Was it difficult the first day I walked into the legislature? Absolutely. It was incredibly difficult. And there were lots of people saying to me, it isn't dignified. You shouldn't be there. It doesn't look right. It's not good for the party. It's not good for you. There was a pressure, and there were people who were worried about me. I think people don't want to see other people suffering. They don't want to see the indignity or the pain of someone being subjected to a humiliating situation. And so I had to be very clear with people that I was there because I chose to be, that there was no bad seat in the legislature. And quite frankly, over the last 2 years, Martin, I feel that I have contributed. I have supported my colleagues. I've supported John Fraser when he was the interim leader. And I have done things in the legislature that it wasn't possible for anybody else to do because I had been in those chairs. I had been the leader, I'd been the premier, and I knew the workings of government. And so I was able to stand up and say things that other people have not been able to say. So I feel quite vindicated in staying. You will note that I am not there. I'm not in the legislature every day. I'm working every day, but I'm not in the legislature every day. I think that it's important that I be there to hold the government to account. But I also think it's important that my colleagues have the ability to be there without me as a lightning rod, because I am a lightning rod, and that sometimes gets in the way of other people. So I've tried to balance those things while serving my constituents, and I feel strongly that it was the right thing to do.
But I guess the question is, and I think we're answering it, is that men don't seem to make that decision once they're out. And I can tell you that, without saying who, that a former male premier who is very fond of you asked me once privately, well, for goodness sake, why is she still in the legislature? And I said, I I think she believes it's the right thing to do. It's not undignified. Rachel Notley, did you have a decision to make after your loss, and was it tough for you to go back to work?
Well, I think there's a few things. First of all, I don't know that it's always the case that men don't come back. I mean, one of the people that I used to be very inspired by, who made a fundamental, foundational change to the province of BC in a mere 3.5 years, doing things that British Columbians still benefit from to this day, was Dave Barrett. He was in government for 3.5 years, and then he tried to get back in for another 15 afterwards. Now, I'm not promising to try and do that, but you know, I mean, and he was someone that I had a great deal of respect for, and his record was really something. You know, Adrian Dix was never premier, but he was leader of the NDP, and he led it to one of its, you know, rather unfortunate losses. No one thought he should have lost, right? But he's still there, and now we see him every day being the health minister. So I don't know that it's straight across the board. I will say, I think New Democrat premiers are slightly less likely to be offered alternative employment. But no, really, the thing for me is, going back a little bit, I think in terms of women, to see if there, I don't know if there's a gendered lens to put on this, but I will say, you know, I never really bought into the trappings of power when I was premier. I found it, I was a bit uncomfortable with it, and a bit uncomfortable with the deference, and a bit uncomfortable with the pomp and circumstance. And that thing, I think that you are a good leader as long as you remain connected to your roots and your non-political friends and the people in your community who you love and care for, and who, you know, and I think that as long as you do that, then you just kind of stay real. And so this idea of whether it's undignified or not undignified, I think certainly that's sort of what I sense in Kathleen too. You know, she's pretty good at staying real. And so that sort of self-consciousness around that is less likely to drive your decision making, because you know what it's like to be in there and to make decisions and to do good things. And it's not about the how other people see you. It's about the work you do when you're there. The other thing I would say, I mean, honestly, I was first elected in 2008. I became leader of a 4-person caucus in November of 2014, and 5 months later, I was premier and leader of a 55-person caucus, and now I'm leader of a 24-person opposition. I feel like I feel like I'm going back to take the course I skipped in high school, and so I'll be in better shape to actually run again. Because and then, you know, for me as well, obviously, you know, I had a lot of people asking me to stay on, and I think what is true amongst women is that you're slightly more inclined when you're in a situation to be sort of guilted in. When people, right. I'm kind of easily guilted into things.
Yeah, that's true.
So anyway, I mean, all of that, again, it's somewhat gendered, but it's also a thing about like what drives you. And I care about my province. We did big things. I feel that the best chance to undo the undoing is to take another run at leading, another run at government. And it's most likely, I figured that I'm probably one of several good options for our party.
I hadn't heard that before. To undo the undoing is an interesting phrase. Sorry, Ms. Wynne, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, Martin, you'll remember Lynn MacLeod came and sat in the legislature and stayed after she was no longer the leader as well. And I always think that the, you know, your constituents elect you to be their MPP or their MLA. They don't necessarily elect you to that high office. And so there is an obligation there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of my pet peeves, like we all agree, one of my pet peeves is when people quit in the middle and cause by-elections.